In this video I'm going to take you through Anthem for Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen. And here at the beginning there is a copy of the whole poem if you want to just have a look through it. And I'm going to give you a bit of an overview. So the poem is structured as a Petrarchan sonnet. It's 14 lines and it has a distinct octet, so a group of 8 lines at the beginning, and a sestet, which is a group of 6 lines at the end, and you can see I've separated them out. Owen's rhyme scheme differs a little bit from the traditional rhyme scheme that you would expect in a Petrarchan sonnet. So if you take the first pair of rhymes as being rhyme A and the second pair of words that rhyme as being rhyme B, you can see this would be the pattern you would expect, and you can see that Owen's is slightly different because at the end, so the rhyme scheme you would get here would be A, B, C, D, but then it becomes E, F, E, G instead of following the same structure. Just a little bit of a difference, and we'll talk about why those things happen when we get to them. The structure of the lines, the rhythm is largely iambic, and an iamb is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one, very much like Shakespeare, so you get that pattern of alternating beats in the line. But there are some variations, he doesn't stick to it absolutely rigidly. An idea that runs like an extended metaphor through a poem is often described as a conceit. And in this poem, the central conceit, is the idea of a funeral. And it's the idea of a funeral which is constructed not out of the elements that you would expect in a traditional religious service, but out of the experiences of war and the responses to bereavement of the people who knew these soldiers who are dying. So the irony of this, that he uses the funeral as this central conceit for the poem, is that he is angry. Owen is angry that these boys are not being honoured in the way that they should. The poem was originally titled Anthem for Dead Youth, and I think you can hear in Doomed Youth there's a couple of things going on. One is the assonance, so the pattern in the sound of doomed and youth. But there's also the fact that when somebody is doomed, there is a chance to possibly go in for a last-minute rescue, whereas by the time somebody is dead, there is nothing to be gained by intervening. And I think a lot of Owen's poetry was protesting. He talks about the fact that my poetry is war and the pity of war, and the poetry is in the pity. The emotional element is very, very important. So let's start at the beginning and start to pick our way through some of the detail. And the poem begins with this rhetorical question: what passing bells for these who die as cattle? Passing bells would be the church bells tolling, so sounding at regular intervals, and they would have been used, perhaps in a time even before clocks, to mark the fact that the church was holding a funeral. So people would know that a funeral was happening from the repeated tolling of the bell. And he uses this simile that they die as cattle, and it implies that they're just being slaughtered like animals. It suggests that they're being slaughtered in huge numbers. There's a lack of identity to it, because cattle is a collective noun. It isn't even just that they're being treated like cows. It's the fact that cattle is a collective noun for several cows. And I think the fact that it's animal imagery also emphasises the lack of humanity. These boys are just being slaughtered like animals for meat. The guns, ironically, are personified. The humans are treated like animals, the guns are personified. In the line, only the monstrous anger of the guns, either the epithet is transferred and the anger is described as being felt by the guns rather than the men wielding them, who are never quite mentioned in the line but they're obviously there, or the anger is attributed to the guns but it's felt by Owen. So it's either that he sees the emotion driving war as being an anger, or that he is angry because these boys are being killed in such huge numbers. Monstrous, we use monsters to suggest size, but we also talk about something being a monster if it's hideous and menacing. So there's lots of connotations there to think about. Only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. Again, the guns are personified, and they're personified as being like a priest or a vicar who is reading a funeral service and reading prayers for these men. But the guns are personified, and it kind of suggests that there are no men, there are just machines, as though the men who are firing the rifles have just become insignificant. Orisons are prayers, and in this case they're prayers for the dead or the dying. These lines are incredibly clever because you've got the alliteration of the R sounds, stutter, ring, rifles, rapid, rattle, but you've also got T, rattle can patter out, stuttering. So you've got these t-t-t-t sounds and r-r-r-r sounds, and you've got the assonance of the hard A, so rapid, rattle, can, patter, and all of it coming together. You've got repetitive hard sounds that mimic the sound of gunfire. Patter is a word that's often used of somebody reciting a speech so well known that it's sort of lost its meaning. We would talk about a salesman's patter, and it's a script that he has that's designed to sort of reel you in, but honestly it doesn't mean much. And I think it's suggesting really that their prayers have become a bit rushed and meaningless, and I think that's there too in the word hasty. And now he begins to answer that what in the rhetorical question at the beginning of the poem. What passing bells? Nothing. There are no mockeries for them, no prayers, no bells. A mockery suggests that it would be hypocritical to hold funerals as we would if these were normal deaths, because they're not normal deaths. These boys have gone to war and been killed in huge numbers in a way that Owen is suggesting is wrong morally. And yet again the weapons are personified, but this time they're personified as a crazy screaming chorus that replaces the voices of a church choir, these shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells. And then we have the bugles, the military trumpets, and when you think now on Remembrance Day, we tend to listen to a bugle playing the last post. The bugles were part of the boys' experience, calling for them, and the sad shires perhaps reflects the places that they came from, their homes, who are mourning them now because they've died. And again we've got repetitive language patterns, just pulling it all together, making it feel quite clever. Shrill, shells, shires, you've got that alliteration happening again. And then in the sestet, this second rhetorical question marks a change from one part of the poem to the other. And the second question, what candles may be held to speed them all? It's another what question like the beginning. Speeding them would refer to a religious farewell that sends them to heaven. He's suggesting that the lights that we see, they're not the lights of candles, but they're shining tears, maybe in the eyes of their friends, maybe in the eyes of brothers and school friends. And boys reminds us that these soldiers are very young. Many of them lied about their age to be allowed to enlist to fight. I think one of the youngest boys recorded in the graves on the battlefields was 14. And then the modal verb shall has a sense of certainty. These boys will be mourned, they shall be grieved for. This is where you start to see that departure from the traditional rhyme scheme of a Petrarchan sonnet, where instead of alternating the rhymes, Owen uses a rhymed couplet here. And a rhyming couplet is usually something that gives us a sense of completion. It's often used at the end of a sonnet, and putting it here works with the idea of goodbyes because it's the feeling of something coming to an end, but it's uncomfortable and disturbing because it's not the end of the poem, but it has that sense of it being a rhyming couplet that finishes something off. There are 3 lines left. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall. Pallor means paleness, so these girls are pale because they're grieving. But Owen puns on the idea of the pall, which is the cloth that covers a coffin, and for a fallen soldier it's very often a flag. The flowers that will be held for these boys, they're not flowers that will be left on a grave, but the memories of the girls who will wait forever for them to come home, and I think it's that sense of them being patient because they're waiting. There were girls who waited forever, never married, because the boys they loved, maybe the boys they were married to, never came home from the war. And then each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. Blinds and curtains were often kept closed at the beginning of the 20th century as a mark of respect because someone in the house had died. And in this case, the sun will pay that respect. So as the sun goes down, it's like the blinds in the house being closed. And it perhaps suggests that the whole of nature mourns for these boys, and that Owen is recording their passing in a way that the world should mourn for. This is a clever poem because all of the way through, Owen takes the elements of a funeral service and constructs them from the things that these boys did experience, all the time protesting against the fact that they didn't get a proper funeral. They died on the battlefield, and many of them were buried there. Some were never even known where they were buried. And it obviously is something that he felt strongly about. It's a powerful piece.